Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. This is Saul Weinerb, your host, with the podcast Isaiah Yeshayahu 14a. The first two verses of chapter 14, Perek Yud Daled, are really the ending of the last chapter, and I probably should have included them in the last podcast. This is another instance where the chapters were incorrectly divided by the numbering system. Yeshayahu, if you recall, in chapter 13, is prophesying about the utter destruction that is in store for the kingdom of Babylon, of Bavel, due to their failure to heed the message of God delivered to them by the Jewish people. Their arrogance and the violent suppression of their enemies and their subjugation of the nations around them and their disrespect for human life ultimately rendered their kingdom, the kingdom of Babylon, deserving of complete and utter destruction. The destruction of Babylon will then enable the redemption of the Jewish people and their return to their native land, and as we shall see, also freeing the many, many other nations that were subjugated under the foot of the Babylonian Empire. So we will start with chapter 14, verse 1. Ki yirachem Adonai et Yaakov, v'achar od b'Yisrael, v'hinicham alad masam, v'nilva hager aleihem v'nispuchu al Beit Yaakov. The word ki, the first word of this verse, can mean four things, the Talmud teaches us. It can mean if, maybe, but, or because. The translators of this verse variously translate this term here either as but or because. In other words, God punished the Babylonians and so on, but he has mercy on Jacob. Or it could mean because he had mercy on Jacob. I will choose the latter translation. The destruction of Babylon will come about because God now finally has mercy upon his people Israel. And as this verse continues to say, he has mercy upon them, and he still yet chooses the people of his chosen nation. He has not given up on them. So therefore, he will bring them back to reside on their land. And this time, the converts of the other nations will join them as well, and they will be added to the people of Israel. This is a reference to the many other nations that were subjugated by Babylon. And when they are exposed to the justice and righteousness of the cause and the message of the Jewish people, many of them will then join the Jewish people as they return to their land. Verse 2 continues, Ulikachum amim vehevium el mekomam. And many peoples, many nations will take them, vehevium, and bring the Jewish people back to their place. V'hitnachalum Beit Yisrael al admat Adonai la'avadim v'lishvachot v'hayu shovim l'shoveim v'radu b'nogseim. Those nations will take the Jewish people and bring them back to their land, and those people, their previous oppressors, the Jewish people will also settle them in the land, but they will be settled as servants and maidservants. They will then become the rulers over their previous captors and the masters of their previous taskmasters. Yeshayahu clearly delineates two groups of people who will join the Jewish people in this time. Those that will join as Gerim, that will be, as we said before, Nispechu al Beit Yaakov, those that join as converts, those of the other oppressed nations who join and become part of the Jewish people, part and parcel, and those that were the previous taskmasters, those that are being punished now because they made the people suffer, made the Jewish people and the other nations suffer. Those people will also join the Jewish people, but they will become maidservants and servants. And then v'hayu shovim l'shovehem, they will be the Jewish people will become captors of their captors, and also the other nations will become captors of the ones who previously were. V'radu b'nogseim, and they will be masters over the people that used to torture them and make them suffer. V'haya, and it will be biyom haniach Adonai l'cha me'atzavcha me'argzecha u'min ha'avoda ha'kasha asher u'badbach. It will be on that day, at the time when the Jewish people finally get some relief from the subjugation of the Babylonian exile. They will then look back at Babylon, at Bavel, bewildered, exhausted, but relieved, and look back in wonder and say the following: V'nosasa es hamashal hazeh melech Bavel. You will then recite this mashal, this poem, this parable, this saying about the king of Babylon, V'yamarta, and you will say, bewildered and surprised. Eich shovat noges shavta madheva. How is it that the noges, our taskmaster, has simply vanished? How is it that the oppression that we were suffering so much from has simply ended and it's over? Shovar Adonai matei rishaim. The way it happened was because God has broken the staff, the stick of the wicked with which they used to strike us. Shevet Moshlim, the rod of the tyrants that used to rule over us. The mighty nation that made so many other nations suffer unceasingly. Makeh Amim Bi'evra, that nation that struck all other nations, many other nations, with wrath and anger. Makat Bilti Sarah, a strike that never stopped. Rodebo Afgoyim, the one who would strike at other nations in anger and in fierceness. Murdof Beli Chasach, right? In relentless pursuit, chasing after the other nations. The Jewish people now understand. It is important to note that they are talking not just on their own behalf because of their own suffering, but explicitly mentioning the suffering of all the many nations of the world who suffered under the yoke of Babylon. They recognize that this was why they deserved that punishment. The entire land, the entire world now finally knows peace. Patzchurina, and rejoicing at the downfall of the wicked. Not only the human beings, not only the people, not only the other nations are happy and rejoicing, but Gam Biroshim Samchulach, even the large pine trees are now happy. Arzei Levanon, the cedars of Lebanon, the great trees, are all happy. Why? Me'oz shochavta lo yaleho kores olenu. Now you have lain down, no one will come and chop us down anymore. Not only human beings, but nature itself. The trees that were exploited by Babylon, the trees that were exploited, as we saw, by Assyria as well before Babylon. We saw how they exploited the great trees and felled forests and as part of their military buildup to establish dominance over others. The exploitation of the natural world for human power and greed is an old story in the history of humankind. Yeshayahu here is emphasizing how, when justice prevails, even the trees of the forests will breathe a sigh of relief. Thank you for joining us for 14a. Looking forward to continuing the study of chapter 14 in the next podcast.